Welcome to Growth Untold, the podcast, where we dive into thoughtful conversations and insightful discussions with world-class people, all with the aim of inspiring, educating, and empowering our listeners.
We are thrilled to have you here with us on this exciting journey to explore the diverse stories and the ideas that have the power to shape the world for the better.
Welcome to Growth Untold, the podcast. Today, joining us is a person who wears many hats and wears them well. She is a multi-talented model, actress, film director, social entrepreneur, and best-selling author. Her heart is set on building a better world through multiple social development and philanthropic efforts through her nonprofit founded in 2013, where she supports and funds social, emotional, life skills, education in underserved communities, and recently through Fantasia Enterprise, a for-profit education company consulting schools and institutions. Get ready to be inspired by Elisa Sednaoui Dellal. Elisa, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for
both.
coming.
Thanks for coming
It's
on the
a
show.
pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
And thank you because my kids think I'm a very cool mom because I told them, I said, I'm going to record the podcast with Mena Massoud. And as you know, they're your big fans, longtime fans. So they were like, what? Mena Massoud? Say hi to him from us. So
How old are your kids now? 10?
10 and 6. 10
Okay,
and 6.
wow, they're
But
growing
yeah,
up fast.
Yeah. They're like, whoa, you're with Mena Massoud today? They're like, that's cool.
And the last time we went out to lunch, I think, must have been a couple of years ago now.
Yep.
Was it?
Time is flying.
Yeah.
No,
Was
I
it pre-pandemic or post-pandemic? I think it was post.
I think we saw each other post as well.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
met before and then we saw each other post. But
Yeah.
time is flying.
Yeah, it is. Well, thanks for coming. I wanted to sit down with you because I find that you have such an interesting life. You're Italian, French, Egyptian. You're married to a Brazilian, Iraqi man. Like, you guys are so multicultural. It's amazing. Your kids must have this, like, it's such a colorful life.
They do. They do. And then they have the best of worlds because, you know, they also live in America. So they get like a little bit of everything. And I'm very excited to see what this melting pot, you know, will gift them with. But
Yeah.
it's definitely a richness. Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, you look amazing for a 10-year-old and 6-year-old. You tell us about your early life a little bit. And you obviously, you know, started off as a model. I think life has taken you in different directions all throughout. But like I said, you have such a incredible upbringing. You spent a lot of time in New York. You lived in London for a while. You've lived kind of all over with this French, Italian, Egyptian background. So tell us about your early life and how you got into modeling in the first place.
Yeah, so I lived the first 5 years of my life in Egypt, in Cairo, and we would often go to Luxor as well, which is in the countryside of Egypt.
And for those who don't know, Luxor and Aswan is really where all, you know, the ancient Egyptian artifacts are. People think of the Great Pyramids in Cairo, but that's not where the ancient Egyptians really lived. They lived in like Luxor and Aswan, so that's amazing.
Yes, it's very special. The Valley of the Kings, Valley of the Queens is, you know, there is something in the air, you know, this
Yes.
history and this energy that's very particular. So, you know, Egypt was formative years. I always say it's my senses, you know, the sense of smell, hearing, the feeling of home really resonates when I land in Egypt. And then I moved to Italy. My parents separated and I grew up the first years in Milan, which was Italian town. And then I went into the countryside, so in Piedmont, which is between Milan and France. And that was a small town, 30,000 inhabitants, overall, but it's the kind of town where everywhere you go, you say, hi, everyone knows who you are, your family history, and all of that. And then, you know, I started modeling very young. I started at 14 years old. And I started really, you know, my mother was working in the fashion business. She was a model herself originally, but then quickly became a fashion stylist, and then she became a talent scout. And then one day when I was 13, you know, all leading up to that, I used to be her assistant on castings. So I used to go everywhere, you know, to the modeling agencies, or when she was doing like big travel castings, especially for Japan. She was a talent scout for Japanese agencies.
Oh, wow.
So there was also that big component of Japan in my life.
Wow.
And I went to Japan when I was 12 the first time with her. But anyway, a few years later, I found myself in an agency in Paris, and she was there to discuss, you know, some other models. And then the agent looks at me and says, but why doesn't she do it? And, you know, looking back, I was very young. There was a rawness, both like, you know, in my look, but really, you know, in my also my development. But when they ask you at 13 years old to be a model, and, you know, you've seen so many models growing up and you're surrounded by models, there is a part of you that kind of wants to say, yeah, I can do that, right? I mean, you want to prove to yourself and to others that you can do that.
And to your mom too, I'm sure.
And
because
to my mom too. And also there was a big component of economic kind of independence, because, you know, I needed to provide for myself. You know, my parents were artists, creative people that in many ways didn't really take decisions that necessarily provided all that financial security. Which meant that at the age of 14, I was really already thinking about really serious things, like, you know, how am I going to pay the books for school, and like things like that. And so modeling was this kind of opportunity to not only travel the world, but also start to be, you know, earning money. And soon after, you know, I started also supporting members of my family. And so, you know, modeling was never really the kind of dream or choice, like in my perception. I never, you know, had this inner dream that, I wanted to be a top model or, you know, but it kind of was an incredible opportunity for me to travel the world. I traveled the most incredible places that I would probably not have gone to if it wasn't for these shoots that would happen like in the middle of nowhere in Africa, in Uruguay, in Mexico, in like, you know, I traveled all over Europe and working, which was also a different dynamic of work, of traveling.
Yeah, it's a blessing. Yeah.
Right.
And was your father, did you have a relationship with him at the time? Was he against it? I mean, he was an artist, so he understood that, you know, this world, but was he against it?
My father was totally against it.
Yeah,
whenever it was time to sign approvals and things, because I was a minor, right? For certain things you needed approval. He was always against it. He would always say no.
I'm sure, like Egyptian Man too, with his young only daughter being like...
Yeah. He was, you know, he is layered, you know, in many ways, but he definitely wasn't like very supportive of it, you know. But I would say that my whole family, except with the exception of my mother, nobody was supportive of it until I became successful.
Right.
And then when I was successful, suddenly everything made sense.
Right.
But until then, you know, it was primarily, and it is primarily, a family that made choices that we could describe as intellectual, or, you know, different kind of professions. Like my father's brother was a scientist that builds little planes during the weekend and flies his planes, two-seats planes. They would work in publishing houses. I don't know, like it was very intellectual, so they looked down on modeling.
Yeah.
Modeling for them was like, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you do something where you use your brain?
Yeah, why would you throw your life away? My experience was the same with my parents. My parents thought I was throwing my life away, essentially. And then when I found success, it was like, wow, this is incredible. Look at this guy. So yeah, I totally
Always
get that.
believed in you
Exactly.
since day one.
Always
Yeah.
really, always knew you would make it,
Exactly,
right? Yeah.
exactly. No, I was not telling you not to do it. I just was worried about you. So yeah, I totally get that.
Can you talk about you like just the experience of just traveling at such a young age and growing up in like Italy, France, Egypt? Like, what was some of the cultural nuances that you had to learn along the way? Like, some things are done this way in this culture, some things are done this way. Like, was it like trial and error? Your mom and dad like slapping the wrist, don't do that, you have to do this way now?
Beautiful question. I mean, there is something to be said about the fact that the world with social media and with the internet has changed a lot in the last 20 years, right? Let's say compared to that time that we're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a mixed identity, and I bet it was a similar thing in your experience, was a challenging thing in the 80s. It wasn't that accepted yet to be different, to not be born and bred from the same place. And, you know, and for both parents to be from the same place, you know. And I lived in very, you know, that's why I made a point of saying it was a small village in the countryside. And even Milan, in the 90s, Milan was very provincial. And I say this, all the Italians watching will know what I mean. It still has sides like that, but it became much more international in the last years, you know? So to your question, I think the challenge in the beginning was that I was never one thing enough. I was never Italian enough because they could see that I was mixed and I spoke in a particular way, and I could, you know, I was speaking different languages, which was unheard of. I mean, there was maybe once in a while a child who spoke English because the mother was American, but, you know, speaking English, speaking French, speaking Arabic, you know, that was weird. I was the only one, Sednaoui, an Arab name. I was the only one with other two boys, Ahmed and Abdelrahman, that came from Morocco with an Arab name in the little village in the countryside of Italy. Now that has changed tremendously. You walk through the same town and you hear English, you hear Spanish, you hear so many languages. Now, France also, you know, France, I had an accent. I'm fluent, I'm bilingual, French, Italian, Spanish, and English, but I have an accent, right? So in French, I had an accent. So it was always like, where are you from, right? What are you, right? Yeah. And then in Egypt, I don't look Egyptian, like from the stereotype of, you know, what someone thinks an Egyptian looks like. The reality is, when you know Egypt, there are, you know, different ways of being Egyptian. So
there are definitely Egyptians who look like you. It's just not a lot. It's very rare. And there are Egyptians who are, you know, very, very dark skinned, who, you know, look African, your typical African American,
right?
Which makes sense because Egypt is in Africa. Egypt is as diverse as almost any other place. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I would never be. That's my Italian Egyptian side. If I don't speak with my hands, I'm not saying it fully.
Exactly.
Don't let it stop you.
But you know, my parents were very multicultural, so it didn't really come from them. They were always kind of like supporting this idea that I was who I was in my multicultural kind of way. But I suffered because I was, you know, bullied in school. Not bullied in that, you know, violent way that people think of when you say bullying. Oh, you think like being beaten up. No, but excluded, teased, like, you know, not necessarily always part of the group until a later age, when I found my first group that are actually my best friends to this day. My friends from high school, my girlfriends from high school are still my best friends. Yeah, I felt that I was different, and different was not a good thing back then.
Yeah, I always say that you didn't feel Italian enough, you didn't feel French enough, you didn't feel Egyptian enough to belong to any one of those communities, which is, I always kind of say that too. Like, growing up in Canada, I didn't feel Canadian enough, for obvious reasons. I was ethnic, and Alex and I went to school together. We were, a few of the only ethnic people in school. But I wasn't Egyptian enough either. And even now when I go to Egypt, it's different. There's these different groups where you always don't feel like you're enough of that one thing. Like in Hollywood, I'm not like your typical like Hollywood LA guy either. So you kind of always feel like you're stuck in the middle, and you've got to find your own people, like you said, and your own path.
Yeah.
And so you got into modeling really young, and obviously what I also find fascinating is you lived in New York for a little bit. You lived in London for a little bit.
Yeah.
How was that experience of always jumping around? That also must have added to the not feeling like, well, I'm like not a New Yorker really, or I'm not like a Londoner really. How was that?
Right.
Living in those different places?
New York and America, I find, have a way, or at least this was my experience, to make you feel that, this expression, come as you are, and that however you are is fine. I mean, obviously what you're saying about Hollywood and fitting into, whatever stereotypes that the big studios or, the movie industry uses, let's say, for their stories. It's absolutely real, and it's a different thing. But I talk as a person. New York was unbelievable for me. I mean, I get emotional just thinking about it. The first day that I landed in New York at 18 years old, and I just literally, I landed and I felt the vibrance of that town, and I felt, this is where I'm gonna live, this is where I wanna be, and this is where I get a chance to just be me. And it doesn't matter where I come from. And actually this richness of the variety and kind of, again, this mixture is really a richness, because New York is so multicultural in that way.
Of course, even in the 70s. Yeah, of course.
So many people from different walks of life get to New York, and just that energy of, if I have a dream and if I have this vision of what it is I want, I can make it. If I work hard enough for it, and if I'm lucky, of course, I can make it. And so for me, New York was really this pivotal moment in my life. And I said I was supposed to be there for 2 days. I ended up staying for 2 weeks, and I came back to Paris. And at that point I was modeling and acting, and I said to my agents, I'm moving to New York. And they were like, no, please, because they knew once I would move to New York, I would never come back. So they said to me, please give us 6 months. And it was very funny, because I didn't even notice. I didn't even realize when I booked the ticket. But exactly, so it was the 11th of September, not 2001, 2006, that I went to New York for the first time. Strange date to arrive, but that was the date that the job was. 11th of September, I landed, and the 11th of April, so exactly 6 months later, I moved to New York. Wow. And 11 turns out to be, we can talk about it later, a funny, interesting, crazy number in my life, where a lot of things happened for me on the 11th. But yeah, so 6 months later, I moved to New York. And then I lived in New York for 5 years, even though at that time, no kids, young woman. I mean, it was amazing. I would travel from New York to Europe. My friends used to say, I mean, it's like the bus for you. I would go from New York to Paris, New York, Paris, like I wouldn't feel it, and it was just my lifestyle. I would be from one place to the other, and I loved that. I really enjoyed that. I have this traveler in me, and New York, 5 years, and then I met my husband. I met my husband in London in 2012. And I was in London editing a documentary that I had directed in Egypt. Yeah. After the 2011 revolution, the Arab Spring.
Yeah.
And, and very quickly we understood that it wasn't going to be a distance relationship. I mean, he was very clear about it. He says, I'm not going to have a distance relationship. And for me, it was a no-brainer. And, I knew that this was the person I was going to be with. And so I moved. I left New York and I moved to London.
Which, hey, like has some similarities, right? A lot of people say London is like the New York of Europe. A lot of people say
Definitely is. It's the Anglo-Saxon town of, Europe. I say it's the most civilized town in the world, London. And when the sun is shining in London,
It's gorgeous.
a fantastic town. And, London was the town where I got married, where I had my first son. And it's a very special place to my heart. I found it to be less open, though, in certain ways. As much as, of course, as a European, it felt familiar because there are a lot of Europeans, French, Spanish, Italians. I had family there. Some of my best friends were living there at the time. And, of course, all of my husband's friends and family. But there was something that was very different from New York. New York had this sparkle, pace, opportunity, speed. And London is not like that at all. I found it in certain things not very spontaneous, not very conducive. So it was cozy, and that's what I needed at that point,
But you grew up quickly.
Yeah,
like,
exactly, of course.
You started working professionally as a model at 14. Like, you grew up quickly. So
Yeah.
it would make sense to me that at 25, 11 years later, you probably felt like, it's time for this next phase of my life. Like that makes sense. And it goes back to what you said earlier about social media. Social media is changing the world in such a rapid way, but it's also, I think, contributing to women having kids later and people starting families later. Like, I'm 32 and now I'm starting to think about like, all right, it's time to settle down, have a family,
Right.
whereas maybe 20 years ago, like my dad probably thought about that when he was 22, not
Right.
32. You know what I
Right.
mean? Maybe a little bit later, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so how was that navigating, obviously traveling the world, being a model, being a woman, and also I know you had other aspirations. You were like, I want to act, I want to direct, and we'll talk about, eventually Fantasia, which you've started as well. How was that navigating that? Did you always know there was more to modeling? Like that was something that you always kind of had in the back of your head, or were you just really laser focused on it?
At the end of the day, I think you need to be focused to kind of get to something. I think if you're too scattered and the expression, spread too thin, at the end of the day, you don't do anything properly. So, of course, in those years, modeling and acting were really my main focus because that's just what took all of my time, and that was required to get to kind of the great jobs, the jobs that were really fulfilling as well, in terms of the partnership that I did with Chanel, with Karl Lagerfeld, my work over the years with all of those major brands. But I always knew that wasn't enough, and
It wasn't enough for you as a
for
person?
For me, it wasn't enough, and I'll explain why. I mean, the natural kind of thought would be, okay, acting. So then you're modeling, great introduction, and you modeling, acting, and then kind of settling into the acting. And somehow I had an internal conflict with that. Every time I would receive an audition, instead of being excited, I was like, interiorly, and that's something I'd love to talk about later as well, in terms of, the topic of your podcast, this idea of really being in tune with your deeper purpose, what really drives you, besides, the programming that you've received as a child, besides what society tells you should be, or life experiences that lead you in a certain direction. What is it that really moves you, that you're really happy to do, or just passionate, or that drives you? So with acting, you know, I always had this conflict, and anyone that was with me, like around me at that time, knows that. And it was this crazy thing because I was getting the opportunity, I was getting the roles, I was getting the thing, and they were like, "But why don't you, like, do you want this? Like, you should do it. You're good at it. It's working out." And I'm like, I don't know. I have a conflict with this. I just feel this is not it.
Something's
right?
not sitting right with you.
Something's not right. And I'm very grateful for the opportunities and the learnings, because the learnings that movie business gave me, and being able to do it across different countries, again, Italy, France, you know, some English stuff, really was formative. And I use it still today, even now, you know, like just the relationship with the camera that I use for other parts of my work. But it just didn't sit right. And so inside there was something that was boiling, you know, like something that was like brewing. And I was like, I knew that I knew deep down that it had to see with development, with culture. I always said I always said I wanted to be a diplomat. These were the careers I looked up to. And today I think, wow, thank God I'm not a diplomat, just because I feel that has so many ties.
Yeah.
You know, you're not as free as we think in a way. But that was always what I was interested in, cross-cultural communication, interestingly enough, right? With the whole mixture of cultures, cross-cultural communication, mediation, building together. How do we, you know, change the world positively?
It had everything to do with who you really are as a person and your upbringing and your background, really.
And where all of this mixture, background, life experience, working in such different businesses as well, and environments and things could be put to use. So I guess what happened is that there was a particular moment that kind of like lit the lamp bulb up, which was in Egypt, in Luxor, when I was shooting that documentary. The documentary was the first time I really felt I was doing something for me that I chose to do. And again, then back then my agents were like, what is she doing? Like, what is she going to do in Egypt now? Self-produced, I directed it myself. I was holding the camera. I was interviewing. I was doing everything myself. It was my school, basically. That's as usual, experiential school. And I find myself it was Ramadan, so the month of fasting for Islamic religion, and it was August in Luxor.
Oh my God, scorching hot.
I don't know, I am still not used to this Fahrenheit degrees, but it was
degrees.
50 degrees Celsius.
50 degrees Celsius. You're talking like 130, 100 and yeah, it's
like
incredibly
you get in
hot.
a trance. It's so hot. Like my best friend who was co-directing this with me from Italy, she was like, what is going on here? It was like crazy, right? So month of August, Ramadan, and we get invited to shoot because I knew some of the people that were working in a school run by volunteers, right? The normal school was shut, it's summer, but it was a classroom where volunteers, teachers were teaching extra classes of English, math, and Arabic to these kids, that were probably 6 years old, 7 years old, who instead of being there or being at home watching TV or playing, were there, right? And it was a crazy moment because I actually was filming this moment. So I actually also have the images of while all of this kind of processed in my head, and I saw the thirst of kids that just wanna learn, and they're sponges, and they don't even know, they're not even that aware of how much they want to learn, but just it's all so open, right? And then in front of them, teachers that were not paid, that were there to teach them, and who didn't have the tools to really teach them, because they were like, I mean, you know, if you watch these images, you as an Egyptian particularly, you would laugh of how they were teaching finger, and everybody had to repeat the word finger, and it was all by heart like this. It was like a really powerful moment. And I was like, wow. I went home that day and I said, this is it. There is something to be done in education to bridge and systematize educational methods. And I knew back then that there were already amazing educational methods that had been developed. No, it wasn't about necessarily reinventing the wheel, but kind of putting things under an umbrella, systematizing the axis.
Packaging it, yeah.
And broadening it and bringing it to communities. So that's how it started. And, you know, immediately...
So that's where you said, this is my purpose. This is what I want to do.
I knew it was a complete alignment. This is what I'm here to do.
Wow.
This is what I'm here to do.
That's amazing.
So tell us about that. You started Fantasia.
Yeah.
Am I saying it right? Because you say it with an accent.
I say it Fantasia, but I always say
Fantasia.
it's freedom to everyone to pronounce it the way they prefer.
Yeah, Fantasia. So when did you start that? Because obviously that was the moment where you realized that would be born. But when did you start it? And I remember last time we went out, you were talking to me about some great progression that you were making as well. Where is it now?
Yeah. So it's been 10 years.
Wow.
10 years of a journey. Again, experiential learning, which is one of the methodologies that we kind of bring forth with Fantasia. What I mean by that, I learned by doing, right? And now, actually, I'm starting my journey. You know, my one of my dreams that I did not fulfill yet was to study. I always had this admiration because I had to work.
Right, because we didn't talk about that. Yeah, you started so young. You didn't.
I mean,
really...
you know, I was a very good in high school. I got like the biggest degrees, the best degrees, like 95 out of 100 points.
wow.
They didn't give me the last 5 points just because I was never there the last year because I was always traveling, working. And during the exam of high school, the teachers were like, promise us that you're not gonna model, promise us that you're going to study, because I was an academic child, and I loved school and I loved learning.
You get that from your dad, by the way, that Egyptian, I'm telling
Fire.
you. Yeah, Egyptians are smart, man. We built the pyramids. No one can figure it out. I truly believe Egyptians are some of the smartest people in the world, but I'm biased, obviously, for obvious reasons.
They are.
Yeah.
So anyway, I finished high school, but my dream was to go to university. And that was the one thing, it still is, this one thing that I'm like, that's something that I really want and missed out on. So now I'm starting my steps to get my first BA in education. So I'm very excited about that. But
good for you. At 35, you're gonna...
Yeah, and the system is not designed. I mean, this is all, you know, I think it makes sense within, you know, the topic of your podcast. The system is not designed for people at 35 that have worked for 10 or 20 years. I've worked for more than 20 years now.
Yeah.
To go back and study. Like I tell you, just starting the process, like, you know, it's designed for freshmen, for people that, you know, for 18-year-olds.
Yeah.
And I gotta ask you about that. So I'm with you that the university system and the school system is really designed, I think, for ulterior motives. I don't think the number one motive of the school system is to actually teach people in the best way possible. Like, for example, I won't get into like the conspiracy behind it, but for example, they don't teach you anything about finances in school, which is like an incredibly important part of life and like important no matter what job you do. They don't really teach you that. As just one example.
Yeah.
So why have you decided to go to university as opposed to like, hey, I want to learn, so I'm going to take these online courses, or I'm going to, read and watch YouTube videos? You're also a big reader. I know you finished like you like read a lot, right?
Yeah.
You
And
like
written a book.
and of course you've written a book as well. You're a published author, but you love to read and you love to learn. But why specifically like the university BA, Bachelor of Arts system?
Look, I've done like the online courses. I've done the Harvard negotiation online course. I did now a UCLA extension child development course. I've done like individual courses, and I think those are great, and I highly recommend, because it's amazing how much you can learn and how much the online can enable us to learn from wherever, right? You don't have to physically be there. Those courses are amazing. You can go at your own pace. Some of them, and some are more like you don't necessarily have to show up like or to a live stream, but you have assignments that are every week. But now it kind of, after 10 years of working with education specialists, psychologists, sociologists, social emotional education experts, and learning on the ground, again, experientially by doing, I got to the point where I want my own credential as well in terms of the education. And I know I have a part of it. I know what I'm talking about after 10 years of working on it. And I can talk to you about, many things in education. But I want to learn more. I want to learn things that I don't know. I want to understand better the research. And it's even more ignited by the child development course that I did at UCLA Extension, because it just gave me such a perspective to understand the depth of how it's been analyzed and studied from the experts, from the theorists, and from Freud, from Erikson, from Piaget, all of these people that worked on education and studied education and child development and how, we develop and learn. But it kind of, the answer to your question is, I kind of want to enrich my grassroots experience, my experience on the ground, with kind of empirical academic knowledge, so that I continue to improve myself, strengthen myself, and I guess also deepen my credibility in my work.
It seems like you're a dedicated lifelong learner, and just the energy that you give off, it's infectious right now, by the way, too. You have an amazing energy about you, like a whole zest for life. And
thank you.
I would love to talk more about just the way you learn. Like, I think you've had the real life experiences, you've written a book, you're enrolled in school. What are some other ways you learn? And even just Mina and I were looking at your socials before this, and like there's some incredible content that you share. Everybody, if you're listening, follow her Instagram account for some amazing content. But where does this like hunger to learn come from? And then also, what are some other platforms that you use to learn and to develop more, I guess, as a person? Loaded question.
I was talking about it with my son yesterday, because he goes to an amazing school where they have a lot of social emotional is a big part, and so they send me homework. And yesterday, meaning like parents get homework, and yesterday,
very California of them.
But I couldn't be happier, and because that's really what I think should happen. And the question yesterday was, what are 3 values that you live by? And then the next question was like, how did you develop them, right? And my answer was, every day, every interaction, every challenge is a way for us to develop and strengthen values. Because every moment, I like, one of the ways I learn is by observing and absorbing, right? Like every moment, every interaction, I'm looking, how is this person communicating? How are they interacting with me? How is their energy? And I have an innate desire to just improve myself, and I think, by the way, working in the entertainment business, and watching yourself, having to watch yourself, which I do less and less to try to not because I can be very critical of myself. So I sometimes, if I record a video and I felt in the moment that it was fine, or I let it, because otherwise you start overanalyzing everything. And that's something that I want to say again in terms of of the theme of your podcast, you know, sometimes we also have to learn how to kind of not over criticize ourselves and overthink things and get into these mental loopholes, because that's not productive either, right?
Yeah.
But I'm grateful of having analyzed myself, analyzed how I come across, how, you know, and just learning how to improve that for the purpose of getting a message across. And how do I learn? I learn, you know, books is I find that life has this way of, if you stay attuned again, connected with that inner voice, that inner inner soul, and you cultivate that, life will bring you things, you know, life, universe, God, whatever you want to call it. It'll bring you things. And interestingly enough, it's always the right thing at the right time if you're paying attention, right? It's the right book, it's the right, and you're like, wow, how did I land on this? Why did I open this by mistake? And then this led me to this. So, you know, books, I look for the information. I have a lot of conversation. You know, one of the things that Fantasia aims to strengthen and teach children and their educators is listening, active listening not to answer, which is what most of us do. You know, we're sitting there and then we're just waiting for our cue to answer.
Yeah.
And
I tell Alex that all the time. I tell him, Alex, what are you doing here?
I know.
Just listen to me without having to always have something to say.
Oh,
I
so
tell him that
anyways.
all the time.
But that's funny that you said that. I was listening, I think it was like another podcast, big podcaster. I think that's why we started one, right, Mina? But there was, they said the best conversation is the game of catch. When you play catch with somebody, you throw back and forth. You don't chuck the ball at them and you whip it down the field and they're like, where'd that go, right? And that ball is the medium and the message you're conveying to the person. It's a beautiful game of back and forth. And that's the way you should learn as well, right? I think it's
an age thing too. What you were saying earlier about being like sitting back and observing and also being confident about who you are. Like as I've gotten older, I've spent less time watching and critiquing myself and being like, I should do this differently, I should do that. And I'm more like, I understand who I am, so I don't have to spend as much time doing that. And that's, I think, when life really opens up. At least for me, it really opened up in a lot of ways, because I was like, okay, I'm no longer trying to like, A, prove who I am to other people, but B, like understand who I am and why I'm doing certain things. It's like, just like, yeah, that's me. So I've accepted that. And I think that goes into what you're saying about listening, which is right. Obviously, because we're in we're recording a podcast, it's different. But in life now, I've noticed myself just listening to people. Yeah. And even if I have something to say about what they said, I just say it in my head. Because really, it's just for me. Right. It's not for them. Right? Like what you said about observing people and like why they're doing certain things. Now I observe people, like what people do sometimes, and I'm like, that's interesting. But I don't like say it. I don't have to say anything about it. It's just like in my head, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, maybe I can learn from that, or maybe I can learn. You know what I mean? Right. So it's right. Yeah, that resonated with me what you said.
Yeah.
In terms of your work, you do a lot of work in philanthropy, social entrepreneurship. What are, I guess, some of the challenges working through that and balancing all these things? Because your hands are in so many different projects that you're working on. How do you balance that?
I think one of the things I became more aware of lately is that the idea of balance is BS. Especially for women. I'm a feminist that believes that men have not chosen patriarchy either. I believe that men were born in the patriarchy, so I don't think it's men's fault. I think we all have to work together to just improve ourselves and get past. So I didn't mean it in a feminist way. No, you can
speak openly.
But what I mean is that, by the nature of fact that we are the ones that become pregnant, that has a great impact on our lives, great impact on our work. And so there is this idea that women that want to work and want to do things need to balance it all. And I had this great conversation with some women last year. I mean, they were having the conversation and I was invited and I was listening again. And they were talking about how it's an idea, the balance. You can't. You just do the best that you can and you try again to be in accordance with yourself, right? So there is a lot of management of time. And I think the way I make it work, I mean, firstly, I'm really trying to not spread myself too thin anymore.
This is something we talked about, I think, last time we had
And I said
lunch.
it even earlier now. I think one of the risks, and I think this is something that we have in common, Mena, that, you know, we like trying different things. We not just trying, we are working in different aspects. You know, I cook your recipes of the, you know, vegan book. In fact, thanks to his book, I learned to do Egyptian salads that I didn't know how to do. So I'm very happy.
Shout out to Evolving
You
Vegan.
know, your work, you know, as an actor, your work here doing a podcast. I mean, you know, you're an entrepreneur. I mean, all the different things that you do. One of the risks is that, you know, there's just too much, because bringing these visions to reality, you know, to your point, I mean, how does this happen? How do you realize the vision? How do you realize this desire, right? I think the reality of life with bureaucracy and just the number of hours that there are in a day. I mean, you know, I've said it many times, I wish there were more hours in a day, because I just need more time to work. I need more time to be a partner. I need more time to just be Elisa and have fun. And I need fun, because if I don't have fun, I miss a sparkle, you know?
So you're saying there's a risk, is what you were going to say, that there's a risk when you're spreading yourself too thin, that, at least for me, you feel like you neglected that.
Yeah, that you're never doing anything properly.
Exactly. Like, sometimes I feel like, man, am I neglecting acting? Like, should I be spending this time studying and, like, you know, like doing clown or doing extra classes or going back into the workshop? And so I totally agree with you. And I've struggled with that. And I've had this conversation with Alex as well. Am I doing too much? Should I just give my whole life to one thing? And we've had this conversation with other guests.
But I then think there are people that need to do more than one thing. That's just how we are programmed, right? So I think it's about really being selective and really being in tune with yourself, being honest with yourself and compassionate with yourself. Because, you know, I have parts of me that are overachieving, and I have an overachieving voice in myself that I had to develop to deal with a lot of things from my childhood, where I had too many responsibilities too early, where I had this voice that just kept me going, and what's next, and what's the list, and what's this, and have you done this, and not being able to go off, let go, you know. And that is another risk as well, because I really think, to use the word balance, even though it's not balance, but, you know, life, you know, there is an equilibrium, and I need fun, and I need moments of contemplation and doing nothing. And I used to feel guilty. I used to feel guilty when I would sit down on the sofa or watch I mean, for years, I couldn't watch a series on TV.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because, you know, at night, I mean, I would crash because I was so tired after a whole day with the kids and working. But, you know, I just didn't give myself that time. And now I know I need that time to be creative.
Yeah.
And is that what you were saying, that as a woman, you feel like you don't have as much time because you're the ones getting pregnant and having kids?
It's very much in demand. It's you're very much in demand.
You're in demand. That's a good way to put it. You're in demand.
You're needed. You're needed.
Yeah.
And I genuinely want to do those things as well. And I know that that's my responsibility.
Yep.
I wanted to say one thing, just in terms of what you were talking, just one thing before we pass to the next question about validation. Because, you know, entertainment business, you know, modeling, acting, but also social media as a general, for anyone who has an account or anyone that's, you know, out there putting content, it's a big threat. This risk of feeding into our need of validation, you know, and that way, because you were talking about, you know, that moment where you stopped wanting to please in that way so much, or being liked so much, or like over analyzing yourself in that way. And that was your big like moment, like where you really stepped into, you know, and it will continue to evolve for all of us. I mean, we're never arrived. We're always, you know, when we think we've learned and understood something, then the next thing to learn and the next set of questions come, right? But I think we have to be very careful in this era of when we feed into this need of validation. And just keeping that in mind when we work, when we communicate, when we do, because that can be a big hindrance in actually realizing what we set out to do.
And recognizing that that's what you're looking for, because I think a lot of people post on social media and whatnot. They don't even realize that the reason they're posting, the reason they're doing this is because they're looking for that validation. And I catch myself doing it too, right? I'll post something, go on. How many likes did I get? How many views did I get? That's you looking for validation, which is funny that you say that, because I literally think that my last thread that I wrote on Threads was, if you try to be everything to everyone, you'll end up nothing to no one. And that was such a big thing for me when I heard that, because I didn't come up with that saying. That's a very
From
popular,
one of our guests.
From one of
Jim
our
Shark.
guests, I think. And I when I heard it, I was like, man, that's true. Like, you're looking for validation constantly from people that you're just trying to be everything to everyone. Like, I've got to, and for me too, because I grew up trying to please everyone, right? Got to please my parents because they want me to do well academically. I've got to please my sisters because they're my older sisters, and you know, they're studying and whatever. I want to please myself because what I really want to do is act and like arts. So you grow up looking for validation, trying to please everybody, and then you end up just lost in this abyss of like nothingness.
Yeah.
You know. And so you're right. It is really important, and and I'm trying to spend less time on it and find a balance. But the reality of our work too is that it's a big decision to make. Whether are you going to move forward in your profession without social media? Because that's like a big tool you're not using.
I'm asking myself a lot these days.
Yeah,
a lot.
Yeah.
There's so many.
And what is social media like right now with what's going on in the world? You know, sometimes you feel this pressure that you have to have an opinion on things. You have to post about things. And it's like, yo, relax. Like, I'm an actor, or I'm a model, or, you know, or I'm a marketing executive. I don't have to give my opinion on political subjects. I don't have to give my opinion on scientific subjects, because this happened during the pandemic too. Everybody wanted to know everybody's stance on where do you stand and all this stuff. Yeah. And you're right. I think social media is going through a growth phase right now, and it's a little toxic. So you just have to be careful.
It's toxic and it's overloaded of content. And so, you know, that's why I appreciate so much the form of a podcast, because it allows to have a conversation, taking the time to have it and to really go through a topic and a subject, rather than this battle to capture the attention of someone within 3 seconds before they scroll to the next thing. It's crazy if you think about it, what we've done. And I really think, to your point, that it's an incredible opportunity for talent, individuals, to have a channel that allows them to speak directly to an audience without passing through the intermediary of a journalist or media or other people talking for you. And I think I've had this, I don't read the interviews anymore.
Yeah.
I don't, just because I accept in the moment I do the interview that I'm doing it for X reason.
Yeah, but you're totally going to listen to this one.
No, I am. No, this one, yes. No, yeah, that's different. That's different because this is a conversation, right?
Of course.
But the interview, when a journalist interviews you and then writes the article, right? And kind of summarizes, and it's fine. I just accept that it's another person who's going to have to kind of condense what I said and say it in their own words. And it will never be exactly accurate.
Yeah,
and I have an issue with that, right? But I just don't read it.
Of course, I do
And I
too.
accept.
I've gotten in a lot of trouble in my past for giving an interview and it getting skewed, and even like giving the interview to one outlet and then lots of other outlets taking that headline, bigger outlets taking that headline, massive outlets, the biggest outlets taking that headline and turning it into a clickbait headline. But no one actually went back and read my whole interview.
Right.
And so what I've started doing, and this should be noticed to all the journalists I speak to, is I record all my interviews now. I record all of them. Because if a journalist wants to come out and say, Mina Massoud said this in our interview, I have it. And I'm like, no, actually, you're taking it out of context.
Cool. I'm gonna.
Oh,
I'm
definitely.
Gonna copy that.
Trust no one.
No, it's okay. I say it again with compassion. I understand. They're not you. They are summarizing. They have a direction from their editor.
They do.
They were told what the subject was.
Yeah.
You know, as you can see, I like to talk. So, you know, you can open a lot of things. So I get it. I have compassion, but I have to protect myself.
Of course.
From reading the interview and getting mad because I'm like, and then the reality is it doesn't really matter. Do you know? Of course it matters. Of course it matters if your quote gets changed and taken out of context and made a clickbait of. Of course it matters. But really, like an article that is approximately true, sure, you know, it's still an article. Publicity is always publicity.
Yeah, I think this is a good learning in terms of people's obsession with controlling every aspect of their life. Once you do the interview, the loss of control is evident. You lose the complete control. You pass over the reins of the person who's done the interview. But it is nice that you both said that once that interview was done, you're like, okay, I'm not going to hold the hockey stick anymore. Terrible analogy, but like
Very Canadian of you.
Very Canadian of me. Okay. You can run with it. It's yours now, right? That's not mine. Even though you guys care about your intellectual property, it matters. Your brand matters. You build it up, right? But it's gone. It's like in an abyss now. And it's nice that you have peace, because I think if we take even a step back, I feel like everybody has an obsession with controlling everything all at once. Right?
Yeah, you have to find peace in this crazy world and social media. And yeah, I've struggled with that too. I've thought I would be more peaceful, and it's something I still struggle with. I mean, by the time this episode comes out, I might not be on social media. I don't know, but it's something that I've said, because as I've gotten older as well, and I'm, you know, like I said, now I'm thinking about settling down, getting married, having kids, like all those things are becoming very real to me. I'm like, what really matters is my inner peace. And if my inner peace, my gut, like you were saying earlier, is telling me, get off social media, like who cares? Then maybe that's the right thing to do. You know, I'll find other ways to market. And I've told Alex as well, like I look up to I miss the era of like George Clooney, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, where people used to have to go to the movies to watch them. Yeah. That was it. They couldn't follow them on Instagram. You want to see Al Pacino? And everybody does, because he's amazing. You go to the movie theater, you pick up a newspaper, you read maybe an article, an interview he gave, and it's like, oh wow, I can't believe he said that. Like I used to collect GQ magazines because of the interviews that were in them. Yeah. Right? So maybe it's time to go back to that era for me, like as me, you know?
You know, people talking about your work rather than you being the one promoting it. And again, I think it's amazing that this channel was created for shameless auto-promotion. Like a friend of mine, Caroline de Maigret, said she had it as her tagline, and she became, very influential influencer, opinion leader. And, you know, she was very upfront, shameless auto-promotion diary. And I think that's brilliant. But I really, myself, where I am right now after 10 years, looking at also the benefits, ups, pros and cons, I really ask myself, at the end of the day, I think I'm more interested in people talking about the work rather than me constantly self-marketing the work, you see? Yeah. And it's maybe a little bit more old school in a way, but I think, it connects to something else, because I'm reading a book right now about ego. Ego is the enemy. Oh. The title is a little bit, I'm not sure about the title necessarily, but the book is very interesting. And one of the points he says, instead of like focusing on wanting to do something rather than being somebody.
Yeah, it's true. I look at some of my favorite actors, man, and they don't have social, like Joaquin Phoenix, or even the people in the past few years that won Oscars. Joaquin Phoenix, Rami Malek, like these people aren't really on social media because, like, yeah, part of me thinks like maybe you just have to take all that time and energy that you spend on there and actually focus on the thing that you want to achieve or the thing that you're passionate about, which would be like acting. Now, if you're using social media or whatever to like put on performances and stuff, that's different. But you're right, for shameless self-promotion, I'm like, yeah, maybe that's not the way.
No.
Maybe you've convinced me. Maybe I gotta go home and
Again,
delete it.
it's a hard one.
Yeah.
I feel I have, like, you know, you start to imagine, okay, if I didn't have the Instagram account, how would the message of the things that I do go out, you know?
Yeah. Before we go, what are you most excited about next? What are you working on next? What are you giving your energy to, other than, of course, your kids, your partner, your life, you know, work-wise?
You know, I'm very excited about everything. I mean, my book I wrote a book that is for 11-year-olds up. In fact, also parents and teachers and a lot of adults read it. And it's
in Italian,
it's
right?
in Italian. It's a toolbox for self-esteem, building self-esteem and handling, you know, bullying, exclusion. And I actually co-wrote it in 4 hands with in linguistic intelligent expert. So it's my story. It's the form of the diary, my diary, true stories of my childhood in school. And, you know, I meet in the book Paolo, who is this expert in intelligence, in linguistic intelligence. And he comes from a more cognitive behavioral aspect. So how the words that we say have a huge importance, right? Because the brain listens, and it listens to us literally. Brain has no sense of humor. So if you say, I have a problem, your brain is going to start to send signals to your body to produce cortisol, the stress hormone. Whereas if you say, I have a challenge, you're going to produce dopamine and adrenaline, right? And that's a very different dynamic. And so the idea was to share these tools with young people, like to make them available for young people. We were very fortunate that the book became a bestseller in Italy, an instant bestseller. It's being published now in French, end of January. And Arabic, it's been currently translated to Arabic, which I'm so excited about.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
And of course, I would love to translate it to English when the time comes and when we find the right publisher. And then I'm very excited because next week I'm going to the biggest world conference on social emotional learning, which is what I work on in Atlanta. So I'm really looking forward to diving and learning again from other people and understanding, you know, what the other players in this space are doing. And, you know, I'm excited to dive into more monitoring and evaluation, which is basically evaluating the impact of the work that we're doing. So how effective this teacher program that we've curated is, and the youth program. So how those life skills that we offer opportunities for strengthening to youth, you know, listening, confidence, teamwork, conflict management, resilience, perseverance, empathy, effective communication, all of these skills that some of us may take for granted, but that need to be taught. And parents cannot teach them alone. And schools need to become better at teaching them. They need to teach those as much as they teach the hard skills. Yeah. So, you know, we've been doing these big studies. We're doing our first kindergarten Hadana in Luxor that is showing how this methodology, the Fantasia approach, applies to the national curriculum. And yeah, I mean, excited to continue the work and work with more schools.
Well, you got a lot going on, and I've really enjoyed sitting down and talking with you.
Absolutely.
I think you've reminded me to listen to my gut, and everybody listening to listen to their gut and what they're doing, and you know, follow your dreams, but listen to that inner voice, because sometimes what you're what you're good at or what you're succeeding in, it might not be what you actually want to do, right? And so you've got to listen to that and be accepting. And also what you just said about words are very powerful. We've got to watch what we say to ourselves, to other people, and wording it in the right way, because words can be very powerful. And instead of, saying like, oh, I'm never going to get there, being like, the time will come. Those are two very, very different things. So
100%.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you
good
both.
seeing
Thank
you
Mena.
again,
Thank you,
Elisa.
Alex.
Thank
Kudos for this amazing project. I'm looking forward to watching the series.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in and listening. Please subscribe, share, and join the journey of growth untold. Don't miss a single nugget. Hit that follow button now on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and Instagram.